Hello and many thanks for joining us on the program. I am Imoni Amarere. The image of a country, both internally and externally, is usually evaluated by a number of factors which include, but not limited to, its development index, human security, military strength, its territorial size, political stability, the quality of its leadership, national behavior, and, of course, the demography of such a country. Many nations have had their noses bloodied and rubbed in the mud in the international system on account of a breach of one or more of these factors. Nigeria is regarded as the giant of Africa, essentially because of its huge population, its economic strength, being, of course, the largest economy on the African continent today, its territorial size, and the very active and strong role it played in international politics in the past. It has a moderately large network of diplomatic missions across the world, and the expectation is that those missions will look out for and protect the corporate interest of Nigeria and of its individual citizens in each of those countries. But for some time now, Nigeria appears to be less and less vibrant on the international stage. The result is that it is no longer being taken seriously by fellow players on the global scene. Earlier this August, a Nigerian diplomat, Abdulrahman Ibrahim, was manhandled and brutalized on the streets of Jakarta, Indonesia, by immigration officers of that country. Nigerians were outraged. The Foreign Affairs Ministry called it an egregious act of international delinquency and vowed to review bilateral relations with the Southeast Asian country. It proceeded to summon the Indonesian ambassador to protest the assault and recalled Nigeria's ambassador to Indonesia for what it called consultations. Well, that is how far it has gone, at least as far as we know. Now, another diplomatic row is also brewing, this time in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, following what reports describe as harassment of Nigerian diplomats, the burgling of the embassy in Kinshasa by a diplomatic police officer deployed to the mission, and the illegal seizure of Nigerian property in another part of the DRC. Earlier in March 2020, there was an attempt to set the residence of the Nigerian ambassador ablaze. The culprit was reportedly apprehended and handed over to the police, but nothing has been heard of that case since then. Now, we understand that all efforts to get the authorities, that is the authorities of the DRC, which is the host country, to investigate this desecration of the embassy and return the seized property have been rebuffed. Both the Indonesian and Democratic Republic of Congo incidents run counter to the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which guarantees the inviolability of diplomatic agents and properties. These incidents, like others before them, have raised concerns about the deteriorating state of Nigeria's diplomatic image and the increasing violent treatment of its nationals abroad. Around the world and even on the African continent, Nigerian citizens are being treated with disdain. Even airlines are getting away with blue murder in the shabby treatment of Nigerian travelers. Some analysts have suggested that Nigeria's dwindling international image may be proportional to its many avoidable internal challenges, which include the increasing spate of insecurity, agitations for self-determination, and secession by various groups, and a general state of intolerance, even by the government of his own citizens. What can be said to be the main thrust of Nigeria's foreign policy in the last couple of years, and how well has it been pursued? Where and when did we miss the point? Well, these are issues we'll be looking at on the program today, so join us in our discourse right after now. Okay, let's meet our guests on the program today. Two of them, two former Nigerian ambassadors. Here in the studio, we have Ambassador Humphrey Ojako, former Nigeria's permanent representative to the United Nations office. Thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you.
And also joining us virtually via Zoom is Ambassador Akin Fayomi. He is Nigeria's former ambassador to France and Monaco, and currently the managing partner of Public Affairs and Diplomacy Center, PADIS. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. To set the tone for our discussion, let's take this special report by our diplomatic correspondent on the implications of retaliatory policies or actions on diplomatic relations.
2019, during the wave of the xenophobic attacks, Nigerian nationals living in South Africa were brutalized by the South African people, with their properties and businesses worth millions of United States dollars destroyed. The next 2 years after that globally condemned xenophobic attacks were turbulent for all other foreign nationals living in South Africa, especially Nigerians. A quick diplomatic intervention led to the evacuation of Nigerians back home. A greater number of victims are yet to recover from that experience, as their businesses had been destroyed by the South African people.
Like last time when it happened to me, I have nobody. I have no one to support. We have to start from the beginning again. We have to look for banks to borrow money, to do all the stuff,
As the dust was just settling on the xenophobic attacks, with Nigerian government believing it had overcome attacks on its citizens in diaspora, the row between Nigerian and Ghanaian traders sprang up in Accra, the Ghanaian capital.
For a Nigerian to have residence permit in Ghana, he has to get what they call non-citizens ID card, which is about $120. If your company does not have a Ghanaian as a partner, you have to cough out about $7,000 for you to have that company registered.
Within that period, the Nigerian High Commission building in Accra was also pulled down by the Ghanaian government, aside the maltreatments of Nigerians.
Since December 1st, 2019, over 600 shops belonging to Nigerians have been under lockdown. The good news is that those 600 shops were open just recently.
Only recently in Jakarta, Indonesia, a Nigerian diplomat, Rahman Ibrahim, was assaulted by the Indonesian immigration officers. This is one assault many raises the question of the general safety of Nigerians in the diaspora.
It's time that our nation begins to roll away a little from the big brother attitude and then plug her diplomacy within the concept of profit making, benefits for the people, and for Nigerians becoming number one.
Although several interventions are ongoing, many Nigerians are eager to know how long Nigerian nationals will continue to suffer ill treatment from other countries.
We have to continue the street of brotherliness, and that is the truth. And let's live with each other with unity, friendliness, and we are brothers.
For most Nigerians, the federal government needs to come up with a firmer retaliatory policy that will put an end to assaults on Nigerian citizens domiciled in foreign countries. But does international diplomatic laws allow for such?
Nigerian foreign policy. It is thereby stated that Nigeria will respect the international treaty and the rule of engagement, which is the conventions, that determine relationship between state and state.
Retaliation in international relations law is a non-amicable action short of war taken by one state government against another in response to conduct the retaliating state considers injurious or unfriendly. It may not necessarily be war or crisis.
Nigeria will not go to war because of that, but we will exert pressure on the government of that country to make sure that the appropriate things are done, and in some cases to even get compensation.
Many countries of the world, including the United States of America, have at different points used this diplomatic weapon in resolving discriminatory or general attacks on its citizens. But then, the big puzzle remains. Will Nigeria government be able to handle such weapon when utilized?
All right, Your Excellencies, thank you once again for joining us on the program. Here we'll be looking at Nigeria's diplomatic actions in recent times. Let me begin from here in the studio with Ambassador Ojako. What can you say today is the focal point of Nigeria's foreign policy pursuits in the international system?
Thank you for having me here, Marina. Nigeria's foreign policy, like most other countries' foreign policies, are not something it's not something you change on a day-to-day basis. No, because the interest of nations could remain quite stable for a while. So in terms of the foundations of Nigeria's foreign policy, nothing much has changed. It is normal to still talk of Nigeria as Africa as the focus of the centerpiece and focus of Nigeria's foreign policy. There are several other interests of the Nigerian nation articulated in the Constitution of the 1999 Constitution as amended. And some of these interests, like the security of Nigeria, which you have articulated in the introduction, these are permanent features of diplomacy. So, for the sake of Nigeria's own sovereign security, its major principal focus is still the safety of the various borders of Nigeria. Those things one foreign minister at the time described as concentric circles. If Benin Republic may not be the most important country in the world, but to Nigeria it is very important. The same goes for say Niger, the same goes for Chad, Cameroon, these countries that immediately surround Nigeria, from where Nigeria's sovereignty could be easily breached. So as that expands and extends, that determines and defines the level of resources and interest Nigeria puts in its foreign policy assets. And this is why Africa as a whole, therefore, becomes its centerpiece. But the interest of nations go far beyond its security as defined in terms of safety of lives and property and the integrity of the borders. The interests of nations also include its own economic stability, production, productivity, growth, prosperity of its people, and all of that. So the economic interests of Nigeria have recently featured very strongly in the brief ambassadors get when Mr. President appoints them to various countries as ambassadors or heads of mission. You go there and leverage on the possibilities that exist in those countries and see which ones are applicable to our own situation and our own environment, so that our own economy can also grow in strength. Our people can also enjoy the fruits of prosperity arising from higher production and productivity and all of that, strengthening the economy. And of course, checking those issues of corruption that interlink between Nigeria and the external environment. Some of these, the critical factors that determine where Nigeria's foreign policy is going to go.
Mm-hmm. All right. Ambassador Fayomi, the world is a very dynamic place. I mean, today's world is not what it was in the 1970s, in the 1960s, when Nigeria's foreign policy began to evolve. And so the expectation is that the policy articulation that was done at independence in 1960 ought to evolve with every administration and possibly every year. Have we seen such an evolution over the last 62 years or thereabout of our national independence? Have we made any major changes to our foreign policy outlook?
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, foreign policy has not drastically changed since the 60s. As my dear colleague, Ambassador Jacob mentioned, the national interest of a country determines, in major part, the foreign policy thrust of that country. Nigeria's national interest is dynamic, as you yourself have just said. Therefore, our diplomacy should also be seen to be dynamic. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. We have hardly changed our foreign policy. It's still based on the concentric circles. That is our immediate neighbors, the African continent, the Commonwealth, and then the rest of the world. Unfortunately, we need to do more in terms of reshaping our foreign policy. It has to be dynamic. It has to be changed constantly. It doesn't have to be the same policy that we've been using since the Tafawa Balewa days that we are still using in the Buhari administration. As our interests evolve, so our foreign policy should also evolve. I don't believe that we should just stand still and wait for things to happen before we then take action or inaction, as the case may be. We have to be proactive in our foreign policy. Of course, the foreign policy also derives from the domestic policy. We are not getting it right at home. There are too many insecurity, banditry, kidnapping. All that affects our foreign policy. All that affects how people take us abroad. They see us as not serious. And you can see what has been happening from your reports, which were spot on. South Africa, DRC, Ghana, Indonesia lately. Nobody takes Nigeria as seriously as they used to. We've lost clout in our foreign policy, and it has to be revamped quickly too, so that Nigeria can take back its rightful position in the Committee of Nations.
Ambassador, if you say we are losing clout or we have lost clout in the international system, what is directly responsible for that? We used to be one of the most vibrant in terms of foreign relations. We were in the forefront of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. We were in the forefront of so many other struggles and so many other international events and issues in the international system years back. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, we were right up there. Well, it doesn't appear to be that way anymore. What is directly responsible for that?
Yes, like I mentioned, foreign policy is an extension of the domestic policy. We are not getting it right at home. Where are you going to get the resources to focus on your foreign policy? When we are taking all the time addressing issues of insecurity in the country, issues of kidnapping, issues of banditry. The government has its job cut out for it. So much so that foreign policy diplomacy suffers. We don't even get enough appropriation from the National Assembly to run our missions. Diplomacy is not run with peanuts. Foreign policy requires lots of resources from the country. And you can ask our missions abroad. They cannot sometimes even attend conferences where Nigeria's voice will be heard. I like that caption. The diplomacy is limping right now. We have not lost clout, I won't say that, but we are losing it. That is what I said, that's what I continue to reiterate, because we still have a voice out there but it's not as powerful as it used to be. You mentioned the good days of apartheid and Nigeria's liberation efforts, ECOMOG in West Africa here, and all that. We don't have the resources to pursue those kind of diplomacy anymore. And we don't have the strength, because all our strength is now looking inwards, trying to take care of the country. We can't then go out and be as assertive as we used to be in those good old days.
Ambassador Jaco, when it comes to these issues, in terms of resources, is foreign policy usually the first casualty of poor resources back home? And if it is, what can be done to reverse that trend?
Indeed, Ambassador Akin has pointed to the very soul of this discussion. The foreign policy of any country is as strong as its domestic policy. It's as simple as that. If at the domestic level you're having to deal with issues you ought to have in the Nigerian parlance called settled issues, you named quite a number of them in your introduction, where we are still talking of issues of sovereignty. Is Nigeria really a sovereign union? Or is it aspiring to become a nation and all of that? That's the main discussion right now. And the manifestations are in the various instabilities, insecurities, the economic meltdown we're beginning to experience in Nigeria and so on. When these things are happening in the domestic front, the reflection on foreign policy and its practice is almost automatic and obvious. Yes, Ambassador Aki mentioned that foreign policy is not a cheap enterprise. Like Nigeria has missions in over 203 countries, such number of missions overseas. To run them is not peanuts, as he said. If the managers of Nigeria's domestic policy, if they do not understand and appreciate the importance of those diplomatic missions, if they don't appreciate the contribution, which is usually humongous, even though not easy to measure, contributions of the foreign service, of diplomacy, in the stability of the nation itself, in its security. If they don't appreciate these things, when you take proposals to them at the National Assembly, for instance, for a budget that could support a robust and dynamic foreign policy as we advocate, it is all shut down. So you get a situation where Nigeria has one of the largest foreign services in Africa, and in reverse, its budgetary allocation to the same foreign service is probably one of the lowest, speaking in terms of population and stuff, in the same continent. So they can't go well together. You either are prepared to fund this or you're not. Being prepared to fund foreign policy is one thing. The capacity, the ability to do that funding is another thing. When people talk of the era of Nigeria's very strong foreign policy dynamic and all of that, the first thing that comes to mind is this the era of oil dominance, crude oil dominance in the economy of Nigeria and the wealth it brought, and some of it trickled into these places. Today, the question should be, are we planning for a post-oil economy that will support a strong and dynamic foreign policy? I don't think we've started addressing such things yet. And that's the key to how dynamic our foreign policy could be. If we don't fund it, we don't get the results we desire. And if our country continues to deal with issues we should have settled, like if people are advocating for a referendum, should we always visit such things with kinetic energy? Should we always deploy the military and so on to deal with issues like that? These are things that regular dialogue, consultations could sort out at a cost level that is minimal. But when we turn it into a military affair, it becomes so expensive and begins to draw away resources from those areas like foreign policy where we could put funding. So the dynamics of the domestic environment automatically reflect on the performance of our diplomacy.
Is that to say, Ambassador, that perhaps the way other countries, nation states, relate with us, treat us as an entity and as individual citizens is also a reflection of what they see going on back home in the domestic front?
I can tell you absolutely yes. When I was a PAM rep in Geneva, in various conferences and meetings, there was always some tendency to defer to Nigeria when we raise up our flag to speak. And then other African countries would protest. Why are you giving Nigeria the... And no matter what to explain, one Rwandan ambassador put it very succinctly. He said, moderator, importance is not a function of size. Yeah. So Nigeria is sizable, demographically, geographically, and so on. But in terms of contents of power, does it have what it takes to leverage its image, to protect it, to exude the influence of power, the country with the aura of power? That is what is missing. So if in Nigeria, take a look at how we handle the EndSARS protest. You saw the world watching Nigeria mishandle its own youth, its own people. You go to the eastern parts of the country, you see the military being so robust in dealing with who they call agitators and secessionists and so on. You go to the northern parts of the country where instability and insecurity is becoming a way of life, and you see the struggle between the military and the security agencies and the people, and there's no decorum to any of this. This is a miniaturized world. Now everybody sees what is going on everywhere. You don't need to make any propaganda about it that things are working, because somebody is watching from far away Washington, another person is watching from Moscow, another person is watching from Beijing, and the whole world is watching you. So we cannot continue to do certain things domestically and expect that the world is either not noticing or that those things we are doing have no impact on how they reflect actions on us. So Nigerian citizens, I cannot sit here and say, yes, the only reason they are being mistreated in some countries is because of the failures we suffer here at home. The people outside the diplomatic victims of what we're discussing are not always innocent, because I have served in many countries and I've seen sometimes the attitude, the behavior of Nigerians. Some being in places they have no real business being. Participating in activities they should not really, as self-respecting foreigners living in other people's countries. Such actions also aggravate, at least at the lower level of response to what they're doing. So there is a lot of work to be done. The foreign ministry itself should be able to be better informed and equipped with well-trained officers. Officers who are properly trained and exposed to the ways of diplomacy, and not those who, at the end close of work, you find them in some parts of the town or the city where they really have no business being and stuff like that. So there is a lot of work to be done, both at the level of the foreign ministry, at the level of the federal government, and at the level of various agencies and parastatals that have to implement and execute those reports that come from our missions abroad.
Now, Ambassador Fayomi, Ambassador Ojako just talked about content of power. I'd like to explore that a little bit further. How much of it do we still have in relation to the way we are perceived by host countries, host nations, where we have embassies and high commissions, and where we do have very many Nigerians who are there legally and in some cases illegally?
Thank you. As Ambassador Jaco rightly mentioned, the behavior sometimes of our nationals abroad leaves so much to be desired. Sometimes the missions are there. Number one, they are not mostly there to take care of Nigerians. Consular matters are not the number one priority of our missions. Our missions are meant to project and represent Nigeria in their host countries, attract investment, get consultations between heads of state, get consultations between the foreign ministers so that there will be robust engagements with the host countries. Yes, Nigerian interest is paramount, number one. And then number two, the consular matters. Number three, we also need to have correct kind of officers posted to these missions. Let me give an example. For instance, in France, where I served, it's a large mission, about 30 or so officers, brilliant crop of officers. But from time to time, some other officers that come from various agencies that are living or working in the mission. Mind you, it's not only foreign affairs officers that are in Nigerian missions. You have immigration attaches from Nigerian Immigration Service. You have information officers from Ministry of Information and Orientation. Some, various like that, depending on the country. Sometimes they are not well trained enough, like we foreign service officers. Sometimes the immigration attaché, who is not a diplomat, treats Nigerians the way he treats them at the passport office in Ikeja or in Iguagualada. And that reflects on the whole mission as a whole. Nobody wants to distinguish whether you are from information or you are from foreign affairs. We are all diplomats as far as everybody is concerned. That's number one. We need to post well-trained personnel to our missions to ensure that we continue to give adequate representation. Two, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself needs to be reorganized. These days, officers are not trained beyond the Foreign Service Academy, which they do go to immediately they join the foreign service. There has to be retraining and retraining if we want to reach the level of the power you are talking about. I'm now bringing it down to that power which Nigeria normally has when we are at conferences at the United Nations, at the Commonwealth, at UN offices in Geneva, in Nairobi, where multilateral diplomacy is concerned. We have lost most of that. We don't have officers trained in thematic areas. You send people out to post. They are not well-versed in disarmament matters. They are not well-versed in climate change. They are not well-versed in current issues, emerging issues. We need to go back to the drawing board in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make sure that officers sent out are not just sent out just to go on posting, because it's seen as a largesse, sort of. No, it is seen as a service to Nigeria. And unless we revamp that aspect, the power you are talking about will not come back to us, unfortunately. We have a crop of brilliant officers, no doubt, but you find out that they are maybe 20%, and those are the ones running the whole ministry. Something has to be done to change that perspective so that Nigeria can regain that power you are talking about, can regain it.
So we could say with some level of certainty that perhaps the ill equipment of these officers to carry out their duties and functions may also be responsible once in a while for the kind of issues that are thrown up at these missions and with Nigerian citizens. Because you spoke about consular services, which is one of the things that many Nigerians who go out there complain of. They go out there, they visit a Nigerian mission or a Nigerian embassy, and they are not given the desired attention.
You are correct. You are very correct. And like I said earlier on, let's mention consular, let's face consular now. Most of the people that are doing immigration work at our missions are from the Nigerian Immigration Service, NIS. They deal with passports, they deal with visas. You won't believe it, sometimes they will be told in the mission that passport is not forthcoming from headquarters in Abuja. How bad can that get? You should be able to project in Paris, in London, that we have 500,000 Nigerians or 2 million Nigerian residents, assuming that they are giving birth 2-3 children every year, you should be able to know that they are going to come to the mission to ask for passports. So there is no rocket science in this matter. But then we don't get passport stickers, visa stickers from immigration. Passports booklets are not there. Immigration officers, like I said earlier, are not trained as diplomats. So they are not courteous to the Nigerians that will approach them for these services. These are not foreign service officers who are a different breed entirely, if I may say so. We are not being pompous or arrogant, but Nigerian foreign service officers are different from normal civil servants. That is the crux of the matter. We need to let officers coming to missions from other agencies of government, they have to be trained through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs so that they will know how to behave. And then secondly, that's for personnel. Then you mentioned rightly about the equipment. Yes, that was what Ambassador Ojiako also mentioned by the kind of peanuts that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is given by the National Assembly. If we are well funded, there's no where any mission will not have adequate equipment, computers left and right, that you'll be able to make all your dealings online. These days, particularly with COVID-19 still rampaging, you don't have to go to the missions. Everything will be done virtually and online services. But we don't have that because most missions don't even have enough funds to afford internet services or even to pay electricity bills in some missions. So you can see that it's not limited to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's limited not only to the other agencies that are housed in Nigerian missions. It also goes back to government itself, goes back to the legislature. If the Senate says 5% of GDP is going to foreign service, that will be something. We are getting now maybe 0.1 or 0.2%, while our competitors like South Africa, 5-6%, Egypt about 10% of their GDP. That's why they run better diplomacy than we now do, because we don't have the resources. It's not coming to, as rightly mentioned, foreign service is the least of the problem of the government right now. So that's how it is, unfortunately.
All right, let's take a breather here. We'll return and we'll be looking at some of the case studies. Stay with us. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. My guests are Ambassador Akin Fayomi, who is joining us virtually via Zoom, former Nigerian ambassador to France and Monaco, and Ambassador Humphrey Ojiako, former Nigerian permanent representative to the United Nations office in Geneva. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Ambassador Ojiako, now, I do know that most countries of the world today, their foreign policies are actually spearheaded and run, as it were, by their leaders, their presidents. And the foreign affairs ministries just take a cue from what happens or what the president or the leader does. How much of that are we seeing in the Nigeria under a democratic setting that we have been in the last 22 years?
Thank you for that question. Actually, the foreign policy of any country reflects the pronounced position of the head of state. It's also a reading of his body language, because in essence, the president and head of state is the actual foreign minister of any country. The foreign minister appointed is his direct representative. So if a president takes a certain attitude to foreign policy, if you recall, in the days of General Obasanjo, I don't know how many foreign ministers he had in the 8 years he was president, because he was the main driver. He was traveling more than the foreign ministers himself. And the reason or excuse was he was going in pursuit of foreign direct investment. Now, the current president is not operating in that way. I'm not in a position to determine his level of interest or involvement in foreign policy decision making. But he has a young, dynamic foreign minister and a foreign ministry that should be able, should be in a position. This is a 60-something-year-old foreign ministry. It should be able to rely on his own memories, on his own institutional memories, to begin to do some of the things Ambassador Fayomi just mentioned here. Take a look at the training thing, It may not need the president to tell the foreign ministry that every person going out to represent Nigeria in whatever capacity, irrespective of which ministry, department, agency it comes from, is the face of Nigeria in that country. Therefore, there should be a synergy of training. There should be a bottom line of understanding, of knowledge of such officers, such personnel. You cannot say the Vienna Convention applies to only diplomatic staff, so defined. It applies to everyone in the mission. So that training is one thing I can say with a lot of information in my own hands, that it is not taking place in the foreign ministry. The other aspect is recruitment. Who do you recruit into the foreign service? Again, is it the president to articulate that, or is it the ministry itself to articulate? This is the
ministry
quality
that should actually have the expertise and advise the president.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So this is the quality of personnel we want in the foreign service. And I can tell you very authoritatively indeed that most countries pick their best and brightest for the foreign service. So when you go to some missions and see those people who are there, they're very highly trained, they have passed through the crucible, they have been trained and retrained to provide service. Not going there as a favor you are doing somebody. You are sending people to work overseas. And many of them carry the same attitude. They carry the same mentalities they exhibit here at home and take it to the mission. That's where in not too distant past, we've been hearing stories about corruption in the missions. I can tell you that as a young officer in the early 1980s, you didn't hear the word corruption in the foreign service. It didn't exist. But all of a sudden, you now hear of Nigerian citizens overseas having to pay certain monies under the table to certain people to get a passport, to have the documents of their children facilitated and so on. Those were things we never heard of. Personally, as Akin suggested, I have no problem with various MDAs having their personnel to be posted. But they must subject them to that rigor of personal discipline, to that rigor of training, of re-education, that this is the foreign service, this is not the domestic service. If I'm in the immigration desk in Abuja airport and somebody is passing and I say, what are you carrying? And he tells me, I say, no, this is illicit. And I suggest that he gives me a certain money. He's a Nigerian. He may understand what you're saying. If I'm in the immigration desk in London and ask somebody who has a totally different orientation about something that is not in the books, again, they are scandalized. They don't, is it how this mission runs? Are these people diplomats? And again, Aki hinted at it. Once you're in the mission, it doesn't matter whether you came from immigration. It doesn't matter where you came from, trade, or from wherever you came from. Or from
information.
Exactly. Yeah. You are a diplomat. You're a Nigerian diplomat in the place. So some of those people being mistreated or mishandled, there are provisions for how a diplomat should be treated at post. There are also responsibilities of the diplomat himself so that he doesn't get caught up in situations that are awkward, not just for him and the mission, but for the country that sent him. So the foreign ministry, to my mind, has a lot of work to do here. At least some of the groundwork of ensuring that personnel you send out are properly equipped.
So shouldn't the foreign
trained.
ministry be the clearinghouse for all such other staff that are sent outside the country to other ministries?
In fact, in a seminar, an interministerial seminar, I think it was between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Assembly that was held recently, I was one of the resource persons. And this was the subject I hammered upon. There has to be this synergy of cooperation and collaboration between the National Assembly, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and all other ministries that have interface with the Foreign Service. And I can tell you, there is no ministry, or in fact agency, in the Nigerian system today that doesn't have a certain official, interface with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Because everyone knows that if you want to talk of architecture, the Foreign Ministry is the architectural ministry of the Nigerian public service system. Who doesn't encounter them one way or the other once you leave the shores of Nigeria? So to treat it as, those foreign affairs, what do they even do? What do they produce? What do they contribute? That is a wrong approach to foreign policy.
Ambassador Fayomi, very quickly, another issue that is been thrown up is the appointment or the nomination of non-career ambassadors to some of these very key missions. How is that impacting the way we have conducted our diplomacy?
Negatively, I must say. It's there the president's prerogative to appoint ambassadors and high commissioners. It's in the constitution. But at the same time, it's also there that a certain percentage should not be exceeded, maybe 20% for political appointees, and then the rest for career diplomats who have been trained over the years. Before you can go out as an ambassador, a career ambassador, you will have spent at least 28, 30 years in the Nigerian Foreign Service. That says a lot for the experience that you are going to bring to bear at your post. But when you send non-career individuals, particularly to key missions, then you got it wrong, because you want to send the best out to our key allies like the USA, like the UK, like France, like Russia. This is where career diplomats should go to. I'm not saying that all of the political appointees are bad, because some of them also have reached the bar of their profession, either a judge somewhere or a general somewhere and all that. So they also have their own experiences, but they don't have diplomatic experience. It's like sending me to the army and say, okay, Ambassador Fayomi, you are now General Fayomi, go and be a GOC in a 3rd Division in Jos. I can use the administrative experience, but I don't have military experience. That's the same thing. That's the simplest example one can use. You can't send non-career to key missions. Yes, maybe I would like to give jobs to the boys, in quotes, as we used to say, but then send them to quiet corners where they can sit down and retire quietly, but not to where decisions are going to be made, where you need Nigeria's voice to be heard. Most of them go there for medical holidays, more or less. When you are sending 80-something-year-old as ambassadors, what do you expect? He doesn't have the energy, he doesn't have the vigor. Meanwhile, he doesn't even have the training, he doesn't have the expertise that is needed. It's Nigeria that suffers when we do these things. We've said it over and over, but then nobody does anything about it. Everybody looks the other way, and then we expect to get respect. I don't think that will happen.
Okay, Ambassador Fayomi, what would be your final word on this issue? What would be your recommendation if you were to advise the Minister of Foreign Affairs today on way forward? What would it be?
I'm happy you came to that. I was hoping that will happen. Yes, I will immediately ask him to convene a retreat that will bring in all the stakeholders. They don't know it all in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Even when we were there, we don't know it all. We still rely on the NIIA, Institute of International Affairs, NIPS at Kuru, the House Committee, Senate Committee, and all that. Let there be a retreat of all foreign policy stakeholders. And then we sit down all this thing myself and Humphrey are talking about, and which many other people have talked about, they will all be put on the table. And then we see how we can address it. I think the last retreat that was held comprehensively was in Kuru in 1986 or something like that. So it's been a long time. We need to do this so that we can get all the synergy, all the training. In fact, all the points we have raised on your program today will then be put on the table, and everybody will be carried along in terms of resources, funding, training, everything can be addressed in a one-week retreat, and we can re-strategize our foreign policy and see how we can make it more dynamic.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Akin Fayomi. Ambassador Ejako, what would be your last word here, your final thing?
Indeed, in adding to what Akin has said, because that's what it is, you need to create this synergy between the MDAs, the National Assembly, the presidency, and all stakeholders in the foreign policy area. But if I were to advise the foreign minister, as you said, at least the lowest hanging fruits, it may cost money, but they're still lower, is recruitment process. It should not be subject to political considerations. It should be subject of merit. And I don't think there's any state in Nigeria today that cannot produce 1 or 2, 3 meritorious or graduates who can work in the foreign service effectively. That's one. Then training. If you recruit even the best college graduates and you don't train them in diplomatic practice, it is not just the 1-year thing at the Foreign Service Academy, and it's a process, a continuous process. And those platforms were established in the foreign service that was performing magnificently. That they were dismantled may be a function of so many things. Those things should be corrected, and recruit the right people, train them, and motivate them properly. Don't frustrate them. Like when somebody has spent 30 years in the foreign service, he has less than 5 years to go, and some person who was a military man or who was a farmer who lost the election in his local becomes the ambassador, and he is there. And it doesn't motivate well, it doesn't work well. Yes.
All right, thank you so much, Your Excellencies. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing your experiences with us. Ambassador Humphrey Ojako is a former Nigeria's permanent representative to the United Nations office in Geneva. Thank you so much, sir, for coming. And Ambassador Akin Fayomi, former Nigerian ambassador to France and Monaco, and currently the managing partner of Public Affairs and Diplomacy Center. Thank you so much for your time. And for you, our viewers out there, we want to thank you for investing your time with us. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.